Most fairy tales begin with once upon a time, but Seraphina Vale's own begins with silence. She hadn't spoken in 10 years, not because she couldn't, but because silence was safer. Her voice was a weapon, her truth a curse, and her mate, the Alpha King who executed her father and ruled with fire. Seraphina Vale lived in the shadows of his palace, a ghost in servant's robes. She scrubbed floors he walked on. She bowed when he passed, and every day she swallowed the scream that clawed at her throat. The kingdom believed she was mute, broken, harmless, but they were wrong. She was the last Vale, the final ember of a bloodline he tried to burn to ash, and the moon goddess, cruel and twisted, had bound her fate to his with a mate mark that pulsed beneath her skin like a curse. She hated him, she feared him, she wanted him. And tonight, he would hear her voice. The palace was a monument to power, cold stone, golden firelight, and silence that echoed louder than screams. Servants moved like shadows. Guards stood like statues, and above them all, the Alpha King ruled from his throne of obsidian. Seraphina Vale had walked these halls for 10 years, not as a noble, not as a prisoner, but as a ghost in servants' robes. She was the girl who never spoke, the one they called the mute. But she wasn't mute. She was hiding. Her voice was a weapon, her truth a curse, and her silence a shield forged from grief and vengeance. She had arrived at the palace at 16, the last survivor of House Vale. Her father had been executed in the courtyard below the throne room. His blood had stained the marble. His name had been erased from history, and the man who ordered it was her fated mate. Alpha King Thorn. She remembered the moment like a scar. The crowd, the chains, her father's voice, steady even as the blade rose. "Live, Seraphina," he had said. "Live, and remember." She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had swallowed her voice and buried it deep. And when the guards came for her, she had stared blankly and said nothing. They assumed she was broken, mute, harmless. They were wrong. She had vowed revenge and silence until the day he would pay. Now she scrubbed the floor beneath his throne, fingers raw, breath steady. Thorn sat above her, speaking to his generals. She didn't look up. She never did. But she felt him, the heat of his presence, the pulse of the mate mark beneath her skin, the cruel twist of fate that bound her to the man who had destroyed her world. She hated him. She feared him. She wanted him. And tonight, he had looked at her, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as something else. She kept her head down, but her heart beat like war drums. The silence was cracking, and the storm was coming. Seraphina rose from the marble floor, her knees aching, her fingers raw. The scent of thorn still lingered in the air, cedarwood, smoke, and something darker. She didn't need to look at him to feel the weight of his gaze. It pressed against her skin like heat, like hunger. She moved to the next chamber, her steps measured, her breath steady. But inside, her pulse raced. He had asked about her. After 10 years of invisibility, he had spoken her name, and that meant danger. The servants whispered as she passed. The king noticed her. "He never speaks to the mute ones. She's cursed, I swear it." She ignored them. She had learned long ago that silence was stronger than rumor. But her silence was no longer safe. It was becoming a spotlight. Later that evening, she stood in the royal library, dusting shelves older than the kingdom itself. The fire crackled, the air was warm, and then she felt him. Thorn entered without a word. His presence filled the room like smoke. She didn't turn, she didn't flinch, but her fingers froze on the spine of a book. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he stood behind her. Close, too close. "You've been here a long time," he said, voice low. 10 years, and not a single word. She said nothing. Her heart thundered. Her skin prickled. "They say you're mute," he continued, "but I don't believe that." He reached past her, his hand brushing hers as he pulled a book from the shelf. The touch was brief. Electric. Her breath caught. "I've seen the way you move," he murmured. "Too graceful, too precise, not broken, not mute." She stepped back, but he followed. His eyes searched hers, dark and unreadable. "What are you hiding, little ghost?" She met his gaze, just for a moment. And in that moment, the mate mark beneath her skin pulsed like fire. He felt it too. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath hitched. But he said nothing, and neither did she. He turned and walked away, leaving the scent of smoke and the echo of questions behind. Seraphina pressed a hand to her chest, where the mark burned. Her silence had protected her for a decade. But now, it was becoming a weapon, and he was starting to bleed. The palace slept beneath a silver sky. Moonlight spilled across the garden paths like spilled milk, soft and quiet. Seraphina stood alone among the roses, her fingers brushing petals that reminded her of blood. She came here often, when the halls were empty, when the silence felt safe. It was the only place she allowed herself to remember. Tonight, the memories were louder than usual. Her father's voice, her mother's laughter, the lullaby they used to sing when the world was still kind. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let the melody escape. Soft, fragile, barely a whisper. Moonlight, don't forget me. Shadows, don't regret me. Her voice trembled, but it was real, alive, and it carried through the garden like a secret. She didn't know he was there. Thorn stood in the shadows, watching, listening, his expression unreadable, his body still. The sound of her voice hit him like a blade, not because it was beautiful, but because it was impossible. She was mute. She had always been mute. But now, she was singing. Seraphina finished the lullaby and opened her eyes. The garden was quiet. Too quiet. She turned and saw him. Thorn stepped into the moonlight, his gaze locked on hers. No armor, no crown, just a man with questions burning in his eyes. "You lied," he said softly. "You lied to me." She froze. Her breath caught. The mate mark pulsed beneath her skin like fire. "Why?" he asked. "Why hide your voice?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Not yet. He took a step closer. "Who are you?" She turned and fled, heart-pounding voice buried once more beneath the weight of fear. But it was too late. He had heard her, and the storm had begun. She ran. Not far. Just enough to breathe. Just enough to hide the tremble in her hands. The garden blurred around her, moonlight streaking through branches like silver knives. Her voice still echoed in her ears, fragile and traitorous. He had heard her. She pressed herself against the stone wall of the east corridor, heart pounding. Her silence had been her shield, her disguise, her revenge. And now, it was shattered. Footsteps, slow, measured, heavy with intent. Thorn appeared at the end of the corridor, his eyes locked on hers. No crown, no guards, just fury wrapped in velvet. "You lied to me," he said, voice low, "for 10 years. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her silence was no longer safe. He stepped closer. "You sang, you spoke, you shattered the illusion, so now, you will answer." She turned her face away, but he reached out. Not roughly, not cruelly, just enough to tilt her chin toward him. His touch was warm, dangerous. "Who are you?" he demanded. She met his gaze, and for the first time in a decade she let the truth rise. "Seraphina Vale," she said, voice steady. "Daughter of the man you executed, the last of my bloodline, and the mate you were cursed to claim." Silence fell between them, not the silence of fear, the silence of revelation. Thorn's jaw clenched, his eyes darkened. The mate mark flared between them, a pulse of heat, of fate, of something neither could control. "You should be dead," he said. "I was," she whispered, "the day you killed him." He stepped back, as if her words had struck him, and they had. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You think I wanted this?" he said. "You think I asked the moon goddess to bind me to a ghost with vengeance in her veins?" She looked over her shoulder, eyes blazing. "You didn't ask and I didn't choose, but here we are." The tension between them crackled, not just rage, but something deeper, something darker, something dangerous. He watched her disappear into the shadows, and for the first time in his reign, the Alpha King felt hunted. She left him standing in the corridor, the echo of her voice still burning in the air. Thorn didn't move. Couldn't. Her words had struck deeper than any blade, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Seraphina Vale, the last of the bloodline he'd tried to erase, and the mate the moon goddess had bound to him with divine cruelty. He returned to his chambers, but sleep refused him. Her voice haunted him, soft, steady, defiant. It wasn't just the truth that unsettled him. It was the way her presence had ignited something primal, something ancient, something forbidden. The mate bond pulsed beneath his skin like fire. He could feel her heartbeat, her breath, her fury, and somewhere beneath it all, her desire. Seraphina stood at her window, moonlight painting her skin in silver. Her fingers trembled against the sill. She hated him. She feared him, but her body betrayed her. The bond was awakening, and it didn't care for vengeance. She remembered the way his breath had brushed her cheek, the heat of his gaze, the way her name had sounded on his lips, like a promise and a threat. She pressed a hand to her chest where the mark burned. It had never flared like this before, not even in dreams, not even in rage. And then, she felt him. Thorn stood outside her door. No guards, no armor, just a man bound by fate and undone by truth. She opened it before he could knock. They stared at each other in silence, the air between them thick with tension, with heat, with history. "You should hate me," he said. "I do," she whispered. "Then why does your mark burn when I'm near?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, because her body was already answering for her. He stepped inside. She didn't stop him. The door closed behind them like a secret. Thorn reached for her, slowly, reverently, as if she were made of glass and fire. His fingers brushed her jaw, her throat, the curve of her collarbone. She shivered. "Say something," he murmured. "Anything." She leaned in, lips near his ear. "You don't deserve my voice." But her breath was warm against his skin. Her body was trembling, and when his hand slid to the small of her back, she didn't pull away. They stood there, enemies, lovers, fated souls, caught in a moment that felt like prophecy. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But the space between them was already burning, and the bond was no longer silent. The air between them pulsed, thick with heat, history, and something neither of them dared name. Seraphina stood inches from Thorn, her breath shallow, her skin flushed. The mate mark burned beneath her collarbone, a cruel reminder of the bond they couldn't sever. Thorn's hand lingered at the small of her back, his thumb brushing the edge of her spine. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her silence now was different, not defensive, not cold. It was trembling. Alive. He leaned in, his lips near her ear, voice low and rough. "You feel it too." She closed her eyes. The scent of him, smoke, cedar, danger, wrapped around her like a storm. Her body betrayed her, leaning into the heat, into the pull. But her mind screamed for distance. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But your body doesn't." His fingers slid along her waist, slow and deliberate, tracing the curve of her hip through the thin fabric of her servant's dress. She gasped, not from fear, but from the fire that surged through her veins. He backed her toward the wall, never touching her fully, never rushing. Just presence, just heat, just the unbearable tension of almost. Her back met stone, his hand pressed flat beside her head. His other hovered near her throat, not touching, just close enough to feel her pulse. "Say the word," he murmured, "and I'll stop." She looked up at him, eyes blazing, lips parted, breath unsteady. Her silence was no longer armor. It was surrender. But she didn't speak, and he didn't stop. Thorn leaned in, his lips brushing the edge of her jaw, then her cheekbone, then the corner of her mouth. Not a kiss, not yet, just the threat of one. The promise. Her fingers curled into his shirt, gripping fabric like lifeline. Her body arched toward him, desperate and defiant. "You're mine," he said, voice like thunder. Fated, marked, claimed. She didn't deny it, couldn't. The bond was roaring now, louder than vengeance, louder than grief. But just as his lips met hers, she turned her head. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not like this." Thorn froze. His breath hitched, and then he stepped back, slow, reluctant, burning. "Then tell me how," he said. "Tell me when." She looked at him, eyes fierce. "When you've earned it." He nodded once, and left her standing there, breathless, trembling, and more alive than she'd felt in 10 years. The night had left her trembling, not from fear, but from the bond, from the way his breath had hovered near her lips, from the way her body had leaned into his without permission. She hadn't kissed him, hadn't surrendered, but she had come close. Too close. Seraphina stood in the royal archives, candlelight flickering across ancient scrolls and dust-covered tomes. Her fingers traced symbols older than the kingdom itself, marks of the moon goddess, of bloodlines, of fate. She was searching, not for revenge, not anymore, for answers. The prophecy had been whispered in fragments, by servants, by rebels, by the wind itself, a veil born in silence, a bond forged in fire, a curse that could only be broken by truth. She found it in a scroll sealed with wax and hidden behind a false wall. The parchment trembled in her hands as she read. "The Alpha shall be bound to the last veil. Her voice shall break the curse. Her love shall crown the ashes." Her breath caught. The curse was real, and she was the key. Behind her, the door creaked open. She turned and found Thorn watching her, shirt undone, eyes dark with something between fury and longing. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Neither should you," she replied, voice steady. He stepped closer, gaze flicking to the scroll in her hands. "You found it." "You knew?" "I suspected," he said, "but I didn't want it to be true." She looked at him, at the man who had killed her father, who had nearly kissed her, who was now bound to her by prophecy and pain. "You're cursed," she said. He nodded. "And you're the cure." The silence between them pulsed, not empty, not cold, charged. He reached for her hand, not to claim, not to control, but to feel. His fingers brushed hers, and the mate mark flared between them, casting a glow across the scroll. "If you speak the truth," he said, "the curse will break. But if you lie—" "I won't lie," she whispered, "but I won't love you either." His jaw clenched. "Then we're both damned." She stepped back, scroll clutched to her chest, heart pounding. The prophecy had changed everything. She was no longer just a servant, no longer just a survivor. She was the fulcrum of fate. And Thorn was no longer her enemy. He was her test. The scroll burned in her hands long after Thorn left. His touch still lingered on her skin, not possessive, not cruel, but something worse. Tender, real, and that terrified her more than any blade. She was the cure to his curse, the voice that could break the bond, But what if she didn't want to? What if vengeance had become her only truth? The rebellion found her that night. A whisper beneath her door, a note tucked into her apron, a meeting beneath the old chapel ruins, where the moonlight couldn't reach. She went, not because she trusted them, but because she needed options. She needed power. 3 figures waited in the shadows, cloaked, armed, angry. "You're the Vale girl," one said. "The mute, the marked." She didn't correct them. Silence was still her armor. "We've waited 10 years, another hissed, for you to rise, for you to finish what your father started." They offered her a dagger, silver, engraved with her family crest. "Kill him," they said. "Break the bond. Free the kingdom." She stared at the blade. It felt cold in her hand, heavy with history, but her fingers curled around it. And then she saw him. Thorn stood at the edge of the ruins watching. He hadn't followed her. He had known. He had waited. Their eyes met across the stone. No words, just heat, just history, just the unbearable truth of fate. She stepped forward, dagger hidden in her sleeve. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched her like a man already bleeding. "You came," he said. "You knew I would." He stepped closer. "Will you kill me?" She pressed the blade to his chest, not hard, not deep, just enough to feel his heartbeat beneath the steel. "I should," she whispered. "Then do it." Her hand trembled. The mate mark flared. His breath hitched. And in that moment, she hated how much she wanted him alive. She dropped the dagger. It clattered against stone. Her silence cracked. "I don't know who I am without revenge," she said. He reached for her, slow, reverent. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. "Then let me show you." She didn't pull away, didn't speak, just leaned into the heat, into the danger, into the man she was supposed to destroy. And somewhere in the ruins the rebellion watched, waiting, judging, planning. But Seraphina Vale was no longer theirs. She was fire. She was fate. She was his. The rebellion had offered her a blade. Thorn had offered her truth. But it was the bond, ancient, primal, divine, that pulled her back to him. Seraphina stood in the doorway of his chambers, moonlight trailing behind her like a veil. She didn't knock, didn't speak, just stepped inside. Thorn rose from the edge of his bed, shirt undone, eyes dark with something between longing and restraint. He didn't ask why she came. He already knew. She crossed the room slowly, deliberately, her fingers trailing across the carved wood of his desk, the velvet of his chair, the edge of his bedpost. Every step was a choice. Every breath, a surrender. He reached for her, not with command, but with reverence. His hands found her waist, her back, the curve of her neck. She trembled beneath his touch, not from fear, but from the weight of finally letting go. Their lips met, soft at first, then desperate. Her fingers tangled in his hair. His mouth traced the line of her throat, her collarbone, the mark that bound them. Clothes fell away like secrets, skin met skin, breath met breath. The bond flared between them, not just magic, but memory, of pain, of silence, of survival. He laid her down gently, as if she were both flame and glass. She pulled him closer, as if she were drowning, and he was the air. Their bodies moved in rhythm, not rushed, not rough, but raw. Every touch was a question, every gasp, an answer. She had hated him, feared him, wanted him, and now, she had him. The mate mark burned between them, casting light across the sheets, the walls, the ceiling. It wasn't just sex. It was prophecy. It was power. It was peace. When it was over, they lay tangled in silence. His hand rested on her hip, her head on his chest. The storm had passed. But the war was far from over. She had surrendered. But she hadn't forgiven. Morning crept through the velvet curtains, soft and golden. Seraphina stirred beneath the sheets, her body wrapped in warmth, her mind tangled in silence. Thorn lay beside her, one arm draped across her waist, his breath steady against her shoulder. She didn't move. Not yet. The night still lingered. In her skin, in her bones, in the bond that pulsed quietly between them. She had surrendered, but she hadn't forgiven. Thorn shifted, eyes opening slowly. He didn't speak, just looked at her, not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had touched something sacred and wasn't sure he deserved it. "You stayed," he said. She nodded barely. "For now." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers. She let him. But her eyes were distant, her thoughts already elsewhere. The rebellion would not wait. They had seen her choose him. They would see it as betrayal, as weakness, as war. She rose from the bed, wrapping the silk sheet around her body like armor. Her mark glowed faintly beneath her collarbone, a reminder of fate, of prophecy, of the price she had yet to pay. Thorn watched her, silent. "You regret it." She turned to him, eyes fierce. "I regret nothing, but I haven't forgotten." He stood, bare-chested, the mate mark burning across his skin. "Then what happens now?" She stepped close, placing a hand over his heart. "Now, we find out if this bond is stronger than blood." A knock shattered the moment. A guard entered, breathless. "Your Majesty, the Eastern Watchtower was attacked. The rebellion has moved." Thorn's eyes darkened. Seraphina's pulse quickened. The war had begun, and this time she was no longer watching from the shadows. The guard's words hung in the air like smoke. The Eastern Watchtower had fallen. The rebellion was no longer whispering. It was roaring. Thorn dismissed the messenger with a nod, but his eyes never left Seraphina. She stood by the window, wrapped in silk and silence, her gaze fixed on the horizon where fire now bloomed. "They're coming for me," he said. She didn't answer. Her fingers curled around the edge of the windowsill, knuckles white. "Will you protect me?" he asked. She turned slowly, her voice low. "You're the reason they rise." He stepped closer. "And you're the reason I still stand." She hated how true that felt. The bond between them pulsed, not gently, not sweetly, but like a heartbeat caught between love and war. Later, when the halls were quiet and the moon returned, Seraphina stood alone in the palace chapel. Dust clung to the altar. Shadows danced across the stained glass. She knelt, not to pray, but to promise. "I will not be his weapon," she whispered. "I will not be their pawn. I will choose my own vengeance, my own justice." She pressed her palm to the cold stone, and the mate mark flared beneath her skin. It didn't hurt, it didn't burn. It simply waited. Behind her, footsteps echoed. She didn't turn. She already knew. Thorn stood at the threshold, watching her kneel. "You made a vow." She rose, eyes fierce. "Not to you." He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Then to whom?" She brushed past him, voice like ice. "To the girl you tried to erase." He didn't follow, didn't speak, just watched her disappear into the dark. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, the rebellion prepared its next strike. Seraphina Vale had made her oath, and this time, she would not be silent. The chapel door closed behind her, sealing her vow in silence. But silence no longer meant safety. It meant choice. It meant war. Seraphina walked the palace halls like a ghost, unseen, unheard, but burning. Her fingers brushed the stone walls, the velvet tapestries, the golden sconces. This place had once felt like a cage. Now it felt like a battlefield. She didn't return to Thorn's chambers, not after the vow, not after the look in his eyes when she said she hadn't sworn to him. Instead, she slipped into the servants' wing, into the shadows she knew best. And there, waiting in the laundry hall beneath the floorboards, were the rebels. 3 of them, cloaked, armed, angry. "You've been quiet," one said, a woman with silver hair and a scar across her lip. "Too quiet." Seraphina didn't flinch. "I've been watching." "And sleeping in the king's bed?" Another spat. "Is that part of your strategy?" She stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You think I've surrendered? You think a night changes 10 years of silence?" The silver-haired woman held up a scroll. "Then prove it." Seraphina took it, unrolled it, read the words carved in blood-red ink. "Deliver the Alpha King to the ruins by moonrise, alone, bound, or be cast out as traitor." Her breath caught, not from fear, but from fury. "You want me to betray him," she said. "You already did," the woman replied. "When you didn't kill him." Seraphina's fingers curled around the scroll. Her mark pulsed beneath her skin, hot and defiant. "You think I owe you loyalty," she whispered. "You think I'm yours?" The rebel stepped closer. "You're a veil. You're our weapon." She met their gaze, voice like steel. "I'm no one's weapon." They left her with the scroll, with the ultimatum, with the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders. That night she stood in her chambers staring at the parchment. Thorn's scent still lingered on her skin. His voice echoed in her memory. His touch haunted her. She could deliver him, bind him, break him, or she could warn him. But either way, she would lose something. The moon rose, the ruins waited, and Seraphina Vale, daughter of the executed, mate of the cursed, had one night to decide. The scroll lay untouched on her desk, its blood-red ink still fresh. Deliver Thorn or be cast out. The rebellion had made their demand, but Seraphina hadn't moved. She stood at the edge of the palace gardens, wind brushing through her hair, the scent of ash and roses clinging to her skin. The moon hung low, watching, waiting. Thorn found her there, silent and still. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. "You're not sleeping," he said. She didn't look at him. "Neither are you." He nodded. "They gave you a choice." She turned then, eyes sharp. "You knew?" "I always knew they'd come for me. I didn't know they'd use you to do it." Her voice was low, steady. "They didn't use me. I used them." He stepped closer, gaze searching hers. "Then what are you waiting for?" She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a folded parchment. Not the scroll, but something older. Something sacred. Her father's final letter. "Tell me why you killed him," she said. "Tell me the truth." Thorn's jaw clenched. His eyes darkened, but he didn't look away. "He wasn't supposed to die," he said. "He was supposed to stand trial. You ordered the execution." "I signed the decree," Thorn admitted, "but the rebellion forged the evidence. They wanted him gone. They wanted me to look like a tyrant." Seraphina's breath caught. "You're lying." "I wish I were." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed document, the original trial order, her father's name, the charges, the falsified seal. "I didn't know until it was too late," Thorn said. "By the time I saw the truth, he was already gone." She took the paper with trembling hands. The seal was wrong, the ink was faded, but the pain was fresh. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know who you were, and when I did, I didn't think you'd believe me." She stepped back, heart pounding. The hatred she'd carried for 10 years began to crack. Not vanish, not fade, but fracture. "You still killed him," she whispered. Thorn nodded. "And I'll carry that until I die." Silence fell between them. Not cold, not cruel, just heavy. She looked at him, really looked. The man, the king, the mate. And for the first time she didn't know what she felt. The rebellion wanted blood. The bond wanted peace. And Seraphina Vale wanted truth. She turned away, scroll still untouched, letter clutched to her chest. The moon rose higher, The ruins waited, and her choice was no longer simple. The truth had shaken her, not shattered, not yet. But the cracks were there. Her father's death wasn't clean. It wasn't just Thorne's cruelty. It was politics. It was betrayal. It was silence. Seraphina didn't sleep that night. She wandered the palace halls like a shadow, her thoughts louder than her voice had ever been. At dawn, the rebellion struck. A blast shattered the eastern gate. Guards scrambled, horns blared, smoke curled into the sky like a warning. Seraphina ran toward the chaos, her mark pulsing, her heart racing. She wasn't a soldier, she wasn't a queen, but she was something else, something the rebels feared. She reached the courtyard just as the second wave hit. Arrows flew, fire spread, and in the center of it all, a rebel blade found her. Pain tore through her side. She collapsed to the stone, blood blooming beneath her fingers. The world spun, the bond flared, then flickered. Thorne was there in seconds. His roar shook the walls. He tore through the rebels like a storm, reaching her, lifting her, holding her. "Stay with me," he growled, voice raw. "Don't you dare leave me." She clung to consciousness, her breath shallow, her vision blurred. The mate mark glowed faintly, not strong, not broken, but fading. He carried her to the infirmary, hands stained with blood, eyes wild with fear. He didn't speak, didn't leave her side, just watched her fight to stay. Hours passed. She woke to candlelight and silence. Thorne sat beside her, head bowed, hand wrapped around hers. She pulled away. "You saved me," she whispered. He looked up, eyes hollow. "Of course I did." She turned her face from him. "That doesn't mean I forgive you." The bond pulsed weakly. Not gone, not whole, just fractured. Thorne stood silent. "Then I'll earn it." She didn't answer, didn't look, just stared at the ceiling, wondering if the bond could survive the war. Outside, the rebellion retreated. But inside her, the battle raged on. The palace was quiet, too quiet. The rebellion had retreated, but the damage lingered. In the stone, in the blood, in her body. Seraphina stood alone in the royal stables, cloaked in black, her wound stitched but aching. She didn't ask permission, didn't leave a note. She simply mounted her horse and rode. The Vale graveyard lay beyond the northern cliffs, hidden beneath weeping willows and frost-covered stone. No guards, no rebels, just ghosts. She dismounted slowly, her boots crunching against the gravel path. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying fragments of memory, her father's laugh, her mother's lullabies, the silence that followed. His grave was simple, no crown, no title, just a name carved in stone, Lord Caelan Vale. She knelt beside it, fingers tracing the letters. Her breath caught, her throat tightened, and then she spoke. "I don't know who I am anymore." Her voice was soft, raw, the first time she'd spoken without fear in years. "They want me to be a weapon, a queen, a curse breaker, but I'm just your daughter." The wind stirred, the trees bowed, and for a moment, it felt like he was listening. "I loved you," she whispered. "I still do, but I don't know if vengeance is enough." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I want peace. I want power. I want him, and I hate that I do." The mate mark pulsed beneath her skin, warm and steady. Not demanding, not cruel, just present. She pressed her forehead to the stone. "Tell me what to do." But the grave was silent. The wind moved on, and Seraphina Vale rose with a new kind of strength. Not the fire of revenge, not the chill of silence, but something in between. She mounted her horse and rode back toward the palace, toward the war, toward the bond, toward the man who had broken her and saved her. Her voice had returned, but her silence was still sacred. The rebellion didn't send an army. They sent a summons A parchment sealed in black wax delivered by a hawk at dawn. No threats, no demands, just a location, a time, and a single word. Come. Thorn read it in silence, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. He didn't ask Seraphina to join him. He didn't need to. She was already preparing her disguise. The summit was held in the ruins of the old council hall, a place once filled with law, now echoing with vengeance. The walls were cracked, the banners torn, the air thick with memory. Thorn arrived alone, cloaked in midnight blue, his crown left behind. He didn't come as king. He came as accused. Seraphina watched from the shadows, her face hidden beneath a hood, her voice sealed behind silence. No one knew she was there. Not the rebels, not Thorn, not even the wind. The leaders of the rebellion stood in a half-circle, 5 of them, each marked by war. The silver-haired woman from the laundry hall, a blind seer with ink-stained hands, a former general with a missing arm, a priestess with fire in her eyes, and a boy no older than 16, already hardened by loss. "You stand before us," the priestess said, "not as ruler but as man. Speak." Thorn didn't flinch. "I've made mistakes. I've signed decrees that cost lives. I've trusted the wrong hands." "You executed Vale," the general growled. Thorn met his gaze. "I signed the order. I didn't know it was forged." The seer stepped forward. "And now you claim redemption?" Thorn's voice was steady. "I claim responsibility." Seraphina's heart pounded. She had heard these words before and in whispers and confessions in the quiet between battles. But here they rang louder, sharper, real. The boy spoke next. "Why should we let you live?" Thorn looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding. "Because killing me won't fix what's broken, but letting me fight beside you might." The circle fell silent. The wind held its breath, and Seraphina stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't reveal her face. She simply placed a single object on the stone floor, her father's letter. The priestess bent to read it. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. "This changes things," she whispered. Thorn turned, finally seeing Seraphina. Their eyes met, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as something in between. She nodded once, then vanished into the shadows. The trial ended without verdict. No chains, no crown, just questions. But one thing was clear. The rebellion no longer saw Thorn as untouchable, and Seraphina Vale was no longer silent. The trial had ended, but the war hadn't. Thorn returned to the palace with no verdict, no peace, and no allies. Only Seraphina's silent gesture, her father's letter, had kept the rebels from drawing blood. He didn't speak of it, didn't ask why she'd stepped forward, but something shifted between them. Not trust, not forgiveness, just gravity. Days passed. The palace grew quiet. The rebellion retreated into whispers, and Seraphina watched Thorn from a distance, studying him, questioning him, fearing him. Then came the feast. A diplomatic gathering, nobles from neighboring territories, peace offerings, toasts, laughter that felt too loud, too forced. Seraphina stood beside Thorn, cloaked in velvet and silence, her eyes scanning every movement, every smile that didn't reach the eyes. She felt it before it happened, a pulse in the bond, sharp and wrong. Thorn raised his goblet, drank, and then staggered. His hand gripped the table, his breath caught. His eyes met hers, wide, wild, pleading. Then he collapsed. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted. Nobles fled. The goblet shattered on the floor, its contents staining the marble like blood. Seraphina dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers finding his pulse, faint, erratic. His skin was cold. His mark flickered. "Poison," she whispered. "Fast. Cruel." The healers rushed in, but she pushed them back. "He's bonded. Only I can stabilize him." They hesitated. She didn't. She pressed her palm to his chest, her mark burning against his. The bond surged, not gentle, not romantic, but violent. It demanded her, all of her. Memories flooded her, his pain, his guilt, his longing. She saw the moment he signed her father's decree, the moment he learned it was forged, the moment he broke. Her voice rose, raw and trembling. You don't get to die. Not like this. The bond flared. Light burst from her skin. The poison fought back. Her body shook. Her breath faltered. But she didn't let go. Thorn gasped, once, twice, then stilled. His eyes opened. His hand found hers. You saved me, he whispered. She pulled away, trembling. I didn't do it for you. He sat up slowly, the room spinning around him. Then why? She stood, voice cold. Because if you die, I'll never get to decide what you mean to me. The healers moved in. Guards secured the room. The poisoned goblet was taken for testing, but Seraphina was already gone, vanished into the night, her mark still burning. She had saved him, but in doing so she had bound herself to him completely. The mate bond was now sealed, irreversible, eternal. And somewhere in the shadows, the rebel who had poisoned the king smiled, because betrayal had already begun. The palace was restless. Whispers filled the halls. The poisoning had shaken the court, but it was Seraphina's intervention that haunted them most. She had saved the king, not with potions, not with politics, but with the bond, raw, ancient, divine. And now, the kingdom wanted answers. Thorn stood before the High Council, pale but steady. His recovery had been swift, unnatural. The mate bond had done more than heal him. It had changed him. But it was Seraphina they demanded to see. She entered the council chamber cloaked in midnight blue, her hair braided with silver thread, her mark glowing faintly beneath her collarbone. The nobles watched her like she was a myth, a threat, a prophecy. The High Chancellor rose. You are Seraphina Vale, daughter of Kaelin, servant of this palace, mate to the Alpha King. She didn't flinch. You have remained silent for 10 years. Today you will speak. The room fell still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Seraphina stepped forward, her boots echoing against the marble floor. She looked at Thorn, not for permission, not for comfort, but for clarity. Then she turned to the council and spoke. I was born into fire. Her voice was low, steady, and sharp as glass. It cut through the silence like a blade. I watched my father die for a crime he didn't commit. I watched my mother bury her grief in silence. I watched this kingdom turn its back on truth. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Thorn didn't move. I became a servant, a shadow, a ghost, and you let me. Her voice rose, fierce and clear. But I am not your ghost. I am not your weapon. I am not your queen. She stepped closer to the council table, her mark flaring. I am Seraphina Vale, and I will not be silent again. The chamber trembled. Light burst from her skin, not fire, not magic, but something older. The curse that had sealed her voice shattered like glass. The nobles shielded their eyes. The council bowed their heads, and Thorn smiled. Not because he had won, but because she had risen. Seraphina turned to the crowd gathered beyond the chamber, servants, guards, rebels, nobles. Her voice carried through the halls, through the walls, through the kingdom. This bond does not make me his, it makes me powerful, and I will use that power to rebuild what you broke. The mate mark pulsed between her and Thorn, no longer a chain, but a bridge. She stepped down from the dais, walked past Thorn, and paused. You live because I chose it, she said softly. Don't forget that. Then she left the chamber, her voice still echoing behind her. The kingdom had heard her. The curse was broken, the silence was gone, and Seraphina Vale had become legend. The day after Seraphina spoke, the kingdom didn't sleep. Her voice had shattered more than a curse. It had broken the illusion that silence was safety, that loyalty was obedience, that fate was fixed. The nobles whispered, the servants watched, the rebellion stirred. And Seraphina Vale stood at the center of it all, no longer hidden, no longer quiet, no longer his. Thorn summoned her to the throne room, not as a king to his mate, but as a ruler to his equal. She entered without ceremony, her cloak trailing ash behind her. The guards bowed, the council stood. Thorn waited at the foot of the throne, not seated, not crowned. "You've changed everything," he said. She didn't smile. It needed changing. He gestured to the empty throne beside his. "They want you to rule." She stepped forward, eyes steady. "Do you?" Thorn hesitated. "I want peace. I want you beside me. But I won't chain you to a crown." She looked at the throne. Gold, cold, heavy, then turned away. "I won't rule beside you," she said. "I'll rule my own way." The council gasped. Thorn didn't. "Then what do you want?" he asked. She stepped onto the dais, not to sit but to speak. The rebellion fractured because it had no center, no voice, no truth. "I will give them that." She turned to the nobles. "I will not be queen. I will not be rebel. I will be Vale." The chamber trembled. The mark on her skin flared. And the people outside, the servants, the rebels, the forgotten, began to gather. By dusk, the courtyard was full, not with soldiers, not with nobles, but with those who had lived in silence, those who had lost fathers, mothers, homes, those who had waited for someone to speak. Seraphina stood before them, no crown on her head, no title on her lips. "You don't need a throne to lead," she said. "You need fire. You need truth. You need choice." The crowd roared, not in rebellion, not in worship, but in recognition. Thorn watched from the balcony, his expression unreadable. She had saved him. She had defied him, and now she had surpassed him. That night, Seraphina formed her own faction, not of rebels, not of royals, but of survivors, fighters, voices. They called themselves the Ashen Circle, and their leader wore no crown, only scars. The kingdom had begun to shift, not toward peace, not toward war, but toward something new. And Seraphina Vale stood at the center, not as a queen, but as a flame. The palace was quiet again, but not with peace, with waiting. The Ashen Circle had risen. Seraphina's voice had become law among the forgotten, and Thorn's crown, once unchallenged, now felt heavier than ever. He summoned her at dusk, not to the throne room, not to the council chamber, but to the garden where they first met, where she had stood in silence, and he had seen her. She arrived cloaked in gray, her mark hidden, her eyes unreadable. The roses had bloomed again, red and wild, as if they knew something was ending. Thorn stood beneath the archway, no guards, no crown, just him. "You've changed everything," he said. She didn't smile. "So have you." He stepped closer. "I've watched you rise. I've watched you lead. And I've watched you walk away from me." Her voice was quiet. "You gave me reasons." Thorn reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet box. Inside, a ring, not royal, not ornate. Simple, silver, marked with the Vale crest. "I'm not asking you to be queen," he said. "I'm asking you to choose." She stared at the ring, at the man, at the bond that had burned between them, healed them, haunted them. "You want me beside you," she said, "but you still wear the crown that killed my father." Thorn's voice broke. "Then take it from me." She looked up, eyes fierce. "And if I do? Then I'll follow you." Silence fell, not cold, not cruel, just final. Seraphina stepped forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the box. Her heart thundered, her voice trembled. "I loved you," she whispered. before I knew what love cost. Thorn's breath caught. And now? She closed the box. Now I choose legacy. He didn't stop her, didn't beg, just nodded. Once, slowly. Then I'll make peace with that, he said, even if it breaks me. She turned away, cloak trailing behind her like smoke. The roses trembled. The bond pulsed, not with fire, but with farewell. That night, Seraphina stood before the ashen circle and declared her path. Not beside Thorn, not beneath him, but beyond him. She would lead, she would rebuild, she would rise, and the kingdom would follow. Thorn watched from the palace balcony, the ring still in his hand, the crown still on his head. She had chosen. And the silence between them was sacred. The ashen circle had claimed the eastern wing of the palace. No banners, no thrones, just firelight and silence. Seraphina stood at its center, wrapped in steel-gray silk, her mark glowing faintly beneath her collarbone. Thorn watched from the shadows. He hadn't summoned her. She hadn't come for him. But the bond between them pulled like a tide, relentless, invisible, undeniable. The coronation was set for dawn, not hers, his. The kingdom demanded tradition, ceremony, control. But Seraphina Vale was none of those things. She found him in the old war room, alone, shirt half unbuttoned, crown untouched on the table, maps scattered, wine untouched. His eyes met hers, and the storm began. "You're not wearing it," she said. He stepped closer. "It doesn't fit anymore." She circled the table, slow, deliberate. "Then why keep it?" Thorn's voice dropped. "Because I haven't earned you." She stopped. The air between them thickened. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table. His breath caught. "You think this is about earning?" she whispered. He moved, not fast, not rough, but with purpose. His hand found her waist. Her mark flared, her pulse stuttered. "I think it's about surrender," he said. She turned, eyes blazing. "I don't surrender." He leaned in, lips near her ear. "Then fight me." She did, not with blades, not with words, but with heat. Her hands found his chest, his mouth found hers. The bond surged, electric and wild. Not gentle, not sweet, just real. They collided like storms, thunder and flame, fury and need. Clothes fell, breath tangled. The war room became a battlefield of skin and silence, but beneath it all the tension remained. The history, the betrayal, the choice. After they lay tangled in shadows, the crown still untouched, the maps forgotten. Thorn traced her mark with reverence. "You could still leave." Seraphina turned to him, voice low. "I could still burn you." He smiled, not with victory, but with awe. "Then let me burn." Outside, the coronation bells began to ring, but inside the storm had already crowned them. The coronation bells tolled like war drums, but Seraphina didn't move. She lay against Thorn's chest, her breath still uneven, her skin slick with the heat of what they'd become. The bond between them pulsed, not with demand, but with something quieter, something terrifying. Intimacy. She rose before he could speak, gathering her silk wrap from the floor, her back to him. The moonlight painted her bare shoulders in silver, but her voice was steel. "This changes nothing." Thorn sat up slowly, the sheet falling from his hips. "It changes everything." She turned, eyes unreadable. "You think one night erases 10 years of silence? Of blood?" "No," he said, "but it proves something survived it." Her laugh was soft, bitter. "Desire isn't survival." "No," he agreed, "but it's real." She crossed the room, each step deliberate, her body still humming from his touch. She stopped at the door, fingers on the handle, but didn't open it. "You want me to stay," she said. "I want you to want to stay." Her heart twisted. The bond between them tugged, aching. She could still feel his hands on her skin, his mouth on her throat, the way he had whispered her name like a vow. "You don't get to want things," she said, "not after what you took." "Then take something back," he said, rising, crossing to her. "Take everything." She turned, and he was there, bare, breathless, burning. His hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't flinch, didn't lean in, but her eyes closed. "You're dangerous," she whispered. "So are you. I don't know how to want you without hating you." "Then hate me," he said, "but don't lie to me." Her breath hitched, the bond flared, not with fire, but with longing. She stepped back, opened the door, and paused. "You said surrender," she murmured, "but I think you're the one who's already on your knees." Then she was gone, her scent lingering like smoke and silk. Thorn stood alone in the war room, the crown still untouched, the maps still scattered. But now, the storm had a name, and it was hers. The palace had returned to order. The coronation had passed. The crown had found its place atop Thorn's head, but Seraphina's absence echoed louder than any anthem. He wore the title. He held the throne, but he couldn't hold her. She hadn't spoken to him since that night, not in words, not in touch, but her silence was no longer cold. It was haunting. It lingered in the halls, in the scent of her skin on his sheets, in the phantom press of her lips against his throat. Thorn stood in the war room again alone. The maps had been cleared, the crown polished, but the memory of her, wrapped in silk, eyes blazing, voice trembling, refused to fade. He could still feel her. The way her fingers had curled against his chest. The way her breath had hitched when he whispered her name. The way her body had arched, not in surrender, but in defiance. He had touched her like a man starved. She had responded like a woman reborn. And now he was starving again. Across the palace, Seraphina stood in the eastern wing, her fingers trailing the edge of a velvet curtain. Her skin still remembered him, the heat, the weight, the way he had held her like she was both crown and curse. She hated that she missed it. The bond between them pulsed, quiet but constant. It didn't demand, it reminded. Every heartbeat a whisper. He's waiting. She closed her eyes, and the memory returned. His mouth on her collarbone, his voice in her ear, the way he had trembled beneath her. She had made him tremble, and yet she had walked away. Not because she didn't want him, but because wanting him felt like losing herself. That night she dreamed of him, not as king, not as alpha, but as the man who had whispered, "Then let me burn." She woke with her mark glowing, her breath shallow, her body aching. The touch haunted her. And somewhere in the palace, Thorn felt it too. The echo of her fingers, the ghost of her voice, the storm they had made. Neither of them spoke. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It was waiting. The palace was quiet but not still. The kind of quiet that trembles beneath the surface, like breath held too long, like lightning waiting to strike. Seraphina walked the halls with purpose, her cloak trailing behind her like smoke. Every step echoed with memory. Every breath tasted like him. She hadn't seen Thorn since the war room, since the storm, since her body had betrayed her pride and her silence had shattered against his mouth. But the bond hadn't faded. It had sharpened. She found him in the training yard alone, shirtless, sword in hand, his muscles flexed with every strike, his skin slick with sweat, his eyes burning with something more than focus. She didn't speak, didn't announce herself. She simply watched, the way his body moved, the way his jaw clenched, the way her name lived in the tension of his shoulders. He sensed her before he saw her, turned, stilled. "You came," he said. "I didn't say I wouldn't," she replied. He dropped the sword. It clattered to the stone like a challenge. "Then say something that matters." She stepped forward, slow, deliberate. You think I'm here to forgive you? No, he said. I think you're here because you can't stay away. Her breath hitched. The bond flared. Her wolf stirred. You think this is weakness, she whispered. I think it's wildfire. She reached him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. Her fingers brushed his chest, once, lightly. He didn't move, didn't breathe. You still tremble for me, she said, only when you look at me like that. Her hand slid lower, slow, testing. His jaw flexed. His breath came sharp. Like what? She asked. Like you want to ruin me. She leaned in, lips grazing his ear. I already did. His hands found her waist, pulled her flush against him. The bond surged, not with fire but with hunger. Her body melted into his, her breath tangled with his name. Then do it again, he growled. She kissed him, not soft, not sweet, but scorching. Their mouths collided, teeth and tongue in fury. His hands gripped her thighs, lifted her, pressed her against the cold stone wall. Her cloak fell, her moan broke. His name tore from her lips like a prayer. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The heat between them said everything. When it was over, they lay tangled in the shadows of the yard, the stars watching, the bond humming like a flame that refused to die. You're still mine, he whispered. I'm still deciding, she replied. But her fingers curled around his, and her silence was softer. The moon had climbed high, casting silver fire across the palace rooftops. Inside, the air was thick with memory, the kind that clings to skin, that hums beneath breath, that refuses to fade. Seraphina hadn't left, not fully. She lingered in the shadows of Thorn's chambers, her cloak forgotten, her silence softer than it had ever been. But softness wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Thorn sat at the edge of the bed, shirt undone, crown discarded. His eyes followed her like a prayer he didn't dare speak aloud. You stayed, he said. I didn't say I wouldn't, she replied, voice low, velvet-wrapped steel. She crossed the room slowly, deliberately, her bare feet silent against the marble. Her mark pulsed beneath her collarbone, glowing faintly. Not with fury, but with fire. You think you're the one who decides, she said. Thorn didn't move. I want you to. Her lips curved, not sweet, not cruel, just dangerous. Then kneel. He did. Without hesitation, without pride. His body lowered before hers, his head bowed, his breath shallow. She stepped behind him, fingers brushing his shoulders, trailing down his spine. He shivered. Not from cold. From her. You wore the crown, she whispered. But you never ruled me. I never tried, he said. No, she murmured. You begged. Her hands slid around his waist, pulling him back against her. His breath caught. The bond between them surged, not with dominance, but with devotion. She turned him slowly, until he was seated again, eyes locked on hers. She climbed into his lap, straddling him, her knees pressing into the mattress, her body flush against his. You said I was weak, she whispered. I lied, he breathed. Her hips moved, slow and deliberate, grinding against him with the kind of confidence that made kings tremble. His head fell back, his throat bared, his grip on control shattered. You said I was yours, she said. You are, he groaned. No, she said, lips grazing his. You're mine. She kissed him, not to claim, but to consume. Their mouths collided, breath tangled, bodies locked in a rhythm older than war. He moaned her name like a confession. She moved like a queen. The room pulsed with heat. The bond between them roared. And Thorn gave her everything. When it was over, he lay beneath her, breathless, undone, his hands trembling against her thighs. Seraphina rose, gathering her cloak, her voice soft but sharp. That's the taste of power, she said. He looked up at her, eyes wild, heart wrecked. and I'll crave it forever. The fire had burned low. The sheets were tangled. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was soft, aching, alive. Thorn lay on his side, watching Seraphina dress in the dim light. Her back was bare, her mark glowing faintly, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't speak. She didn't look at him, but he felt her in every breath. "You always leave," he said. She paused, fingers brushing the edge of her cloak. "You always expect me to stay." "Because I'm afraid," he said. Her hand stilled. "Of what?" "Of losing you," he whispered. She turned then, slowly, her eyes catching his in the dark. "You never had me." "I know," he said, "but I want to." Her breath hitched. The bond between them pulsed, not with heat, but with heartbreak. "You think wanting is enough?" she asked. "No," he said, "but it's all I have." She crossed the room, barefoot, silent. Her fingers brushed his jaw, her touch feather-light. He leaned into it like a man starved. "You broke me," she whispered. "I break myself every time I look at you," he replied. Her lips parted, her eyes shimmered, the silence between them cracked. "I hate that I want you," she said. "Then want me anyway." She sat beside him, her body close but not touching. Her voice was barely a breath. "I don't know how to forgive you." "Then let me earn it," he said. "Let me bleed for it." She looked at him, really looked. Saw the man beneath the crown, the boy beneath the war, the mate beneath the mistake. "You're not the king I feared," she said. "I'm the man who fears you," he replied. Her fingers curled around his. Her silence broke. "Then don't let go." He didn't. And for the first time, the bond between them didn't roar. It wept. The moon had dipped low, casting shadows like secrets across the stone floor. The fire had died, but warmth lingered, in the sheets, in the silence, in the space between their bodies. Seraphina didn't move. Her fingers still curled around Thorn's, her breath steady but shallow. She could feel the bond humming beneath her skin, not demanding, not roaring, just waiting. Thorn watched her like she was a miracle he didn't deserve. His thumb brushed the back of her hand, reverent, cautious. "You're still here," he whispered. "I know," she said. He didn't ask why, didn't dare, but his heart thundered like it might break from the weight of her presence. She turned to him slowly, her hair spilling across the pillow, her eyes soft but unreadable. "I don't forgive you," she said. "I wouldn't believe you if you did. But I'm tired of running." His breath caught, the bond surged, not with heat, but with hope. "Then stay," he said. "Stay for tonight. Stay for me." She didn't answer with words. She leaned in, her lips brushing his, feather-light, trembling. A kiss, not of fire, but of healing. He pulled her closer, arms wrapping around her like armor. Their bodies fit together like memory, like prophecy, like home. She kissed him again, deeper this time. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her mouth claiming his with quiet desperation. He responded with reverence, no hunger, no fury, just love. They undressed each other slowly, like peeling away years of silence. Every touch was a vow, every breath a confession. When they made love, it wasn't war, it wasn't power, it was surrender. Her body moved with his, not to dominate, not to defy, but to belong. His hands traced her skin like scripture. Her moans were soft, sacred. His name was a prayer on her lips. The bond between them didn't flare. It bloomed. After, they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, her head on his chest, his fingers drawing circles on her back. "You stayed," he whispered again. "I did," she said. "Will you leave in the morning?" She didn't answer, but her silence was no longer sharp. It was promise. Morning came slow, golden and quiet. The palace stirred, but the chambers remained still. Seraphina sat at the edge of the bed, wrapped in a sheet, her back bare, her thoughts louder than the silence. Thorn watched her from the pillow, eyes soft, voice untouched. "You didn't leave." "Not yet," she said. The crown sat on the table across the room, polished, waiting. It gleamed like temptation, like betrayal. "They want you to wear it," she murmured. "They want me to be someone I'm not." She turned, eyes sharp. "Then why do you keep it?" "Because I don't know who I am without it." Her breath caught. The bond between them pulsed, not with heat, but with truth. "You're not the crown," she said. "You're the man who trembled beneath me." His jaw flexed. "And you're the woman who made me kneel." She rose, the sheet falling away, her body bathed in morning light. She crossed the room, slow, deliberate, until she stood before the crown. "This thing," she said, fingers brushing the gold, "has taken everything from me." "Then take it back," he said. She turned, eyes blazing. "I don't want it." "Then what do you want?" Her voice was a whisper. "You." The bond surged. The crown dimmed. Thorn stood, bare and breathless, crossing to her. He lifted the crown, held it out. "Then let me give it up." Her hand closed over his, steady, strong. "Not for me, for you." He nodded slowly. "Then I choose you." She stepped closer, lips brushing his. "Then I'll stay." The crown sat untouched. The throne waited. But in that moment, power wasn't gold. It was her. And Thornvale bowed to it. The rain came without warning. Soft at first, then steady. A hush over the palace, a cleansing. Seraphina stood beneath the archway of the old chapel, her cloak damp, her hair curling at the edges. She hadn't meant to come here, but her feet had carried her as if her heart had whispered the way. Inside, the candles flickered low. The air smelled of stone and memory. Thorn was already there. He didn't turn when she entered, just stood before the altar, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders tense. "You always find me in the places I come to hide," he said. "You're not hiding," she replied. "You're waiting." He turned then, slowly. His eyes were tired, but clear. "I have something to say." She nodded once. "Then say it." He stepped forward, each word a weight he'd carried too long. "I knew what they would do to your father. I didn't stop it. I told myself it was politics, that it was necessary, that I couldn't protect you both." Her breath caught. The bond between them pulsed, not with pain, but with truth. "I hated myself for it," he said. "Still do." "Then why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because I thought if you knew you'd never look at me again." "I didn't," she whispered. "Not for years." He stepped closer. "I don't want your forgiveness because I deserve it. I want it because I can't breathe without it." Her eyes shimmered. "You broke me. I know. You made me a weapon. And I loved every scar," he said, "even the ones I gave you." Silence fell. Not empty, not cruel, just full. She reached for him, not with fury, not with fire, but with trembling fingers. Her hand found his chest over his heart. "You should have died for him," she said. "I would now," he replied. Her breath hitched, her eyes closed. The bond between them bloomed, not with heat, but with healing. "Then live for me," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms and she let him. No resistance, no pride, just her heart, breaking open. "I forgive you," she said, voice cracking. "Not because I forget, but because I want to remember without bleeding." He held her tighter, his lips in her hair, his tears silent. And in that chapel, beneath the hush of rain and the weight of everything they'd survived, the bond between them became something sacred, not a chain, a vow. The throne room was full, not with nobles, not with soldiers, but with silence. Seraphina stood beside Thorn, her cloak trailing behind her like shadow and flame. Her mark glowed beneath her collarbone, no longer hidden, no longer feared. Thorn wore no crown, no armor, just her hand in his. The kingdom watched and waited. "You were meant to rule," he said, voice low. "I was meant to burn," she replied. "Then let them see the fire." She stepped forward, her voice steady, her gaze unflinching. "I am Seraphina Vale. I am not your queen. I am not your weapon. I am the silence you tried to bury, and the howl you could not tame." The room held its breath. "I do not rule by blood. I do not kneel for legacy. I choose love. I choose truth. I choose him." She turned to Thorn and he bowed, not to her power, but to her heart. The bond between them pulsed, visible now, a thread of light between their marks. The kingdom saw it, felt it, and bowed with him. Outside the bells rang, not for coronation, not for war, for union, for peace, for the storm that had passed and the fire that remained. Thorn and Seraphina stood together, not as king and queen, not as alpha and mate, but as two souls who had survived the burn and chosen to rise. And in that moment, the ashes of silence became the roots of something new, something sacred, something eternal. To my moon lovers, this story was never just about power. It was about feeling, about fighting, about choosing love even when it hurts. If you felt the fire, if your heart raced, if your silence broke, then you were part of this storm. Now go write your own. Let your voice be velvet. Let your love be wildfire. Let your silence be sacred. And never forget, the moon always watches, and she always chooses the ones who burn brightest. Until the next story.